All right, welcome to another episode of NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we are talking about the Atlanta Falcons, and I am joined by Jonah Carden, host of JJ Talks. How's it going?
It's going right. I'm always excited to be able to talk about the Falcons, even though they just disappoint me greatly. But I'm glad to be here. Definitely glad.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, definitely, and hopefully, there's you can only go up, right?
Uh, we'll see. We will see.
Well, let's just kind of start. I'm not sure what you were thinking. I am a Bears fan, and I don't know. Going into this past season, I wasn't expecting much from the Bears. I just wanted to see progress. From you, what did you expect from the 2021 season, and then how did it go in retrospect, or actually, after?
Yeah. So in a very similar sense, given that this was Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot's first year, we just got a Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff regime. I was looking for okay. I know this roster is not very talented. I know there's not exactly a bunch of expectations. Give me some hope. Give me something to look forward to. Give me some realistic, like, okay, this is our dream. This is kind of our idea going forward, and it's gonna work. So show me that. And I saw some of that, and I did not see much. So on the positive side, I got to see kind of some ideas with Arthur Smith and how his offense was going to go. I really liked the Arthur Smith hire in the first place. He was actually my second head coaching, on my ranking list for the Falcons. What he was able to do with the Titans and Ryan Tannehill, I loved. So I was hoping he would be able to bring that over. And some of it he did. I think our red zone efficiency increased, which was very nice to see. Much better in the red zone. It feels like pass rush and issues in the red zone are Falcons like monstrosities they could never fix. So it was nice to be able to see that. But the offensive line was awful. And I didn't think it would even be that bad, but it was terrible. Matt Ryan never had time. He was the most pressured quarterback in the league. Tons of sacks. It felt like every time our offense was at least getting somewhere, the offensive line was holding it back. And didn't have a run game, which didn't help at all. And then the defensive side of the ball was just a freaking eyesore at times. And, we saw some young guys able to do some things. A.J. Terrell had a breakout season, which was fantastic to see in his sophomore year. But guys like Deion Jones took a step back. Foye Oluokun did very well, but now he's a free agent, so we don't know how that's going to go. Grady Jarrett was always and still is one of the most underrated defensive tackles in the league. He still had a pretty good season, but it's just the entire unit in general did not do very well. I like the Dean Pease, him being hired as a defensive coordinator coming out of retirement, but I don't even think he could do very much with the roster that we had. So I felt like going into the season, we were probably going to be around a 500 team. We finished 7-10, so a little bit under what I was expecting, but I did not have high expectations. I knew we weren't a playoff team, but I also didn't think we were the Jaguars by any means. So we were kind of middle of the pack. So I'm not too shocked with it. There were some highs, some things I did like, some things that disappointed me. So I was kind of in the middle with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you look at it, there were some surprises. That whole, as a Bears fan, Cordarelle Patterson was,
Right.
just crazy. How did that happen? I mean, was that more kind of on Arthur Smith and the coaching staff, or did other teams miss out on his talent? And then will he be someone that they can re-sign for next year?
Well, I think it's a combination. I do think Arthur Smith deserves a ton of credit for being able to utilize Cordarelle Patterson in the way he did. I mean, he was used in a way that we've never seen in his career. Now, he's always been a dynamic guy, and it felt like anytime he did get touches, he did very well. Even back when he was in New England, it seemed that. And with the Bears, it seemed you saw with the Vikings. So all over the time, he saw good things when the ball was in his hands. It just didn't get in his hands much outside of being in the kick return game. And Arthur Smith seemed to be the first guy like, okay, we're going to make you like a real part of our offense. And whether it was in the ground game or the passing game, it was fantastic. I think he had the most productive year outside of kick return yardage in his entire career. And while I would be hesitant on a guy that's in his beginning his 30s, he also still, I think, he doesn't have he hasn't been used that much. It's not like he's been run to the ground and he's in his 30s. I think he still actually has probably 3 or 4 pretty good years left because he hasn't been utilized in that regard. Now, the downside is the last quarter of the season, he really kind of fell off, didn't get utilized much. I think injuries was part of that. So I think in terms of being able to re-sign him, I hope they do. Because not just for how productive he was, and given that, our running back room right now is super questionable with the possible cuts that we're going to have, And currently, we only have 2 receivers under contract for next season. So just as a playmaker, we need somebody. But also how vocal he has been to wanting to stay in Atlanta has been awesome to see. And I'm sure you probably had guys that like, I really want to stay in Chicago. And those are the guys you want to keep if they're so vocal for wanting to stay. So I hope we can keep them. With all that being said, it needs to be cost effective. The Falcons do not have much cap space. So I've seen some sources say he's probably going to command $8 to $9 million a season. And I just don't think we're going to be able to do that. A deal like 2 years for $10 million, I'd be happy with. I think that's fair for both sides. But if it gets to like the 2 years and $17 to $18 million range, I think we're going to have to make him walk.
Yeah, and it makes sense for him too, just the way they've been able to use him.
Yeah, I mean, coming off a season like that, go get your money. You deserve it. I mean, it's not like, especially at his age, he's not going to be able to command that big money. So if someone offers him like, hey, we'll give you 2 years for $20 million, I don't blame him for wanting to go there at all.
Absolutely. And when you talk about like the salary cap issues, talk about, how they're going to be able to maneuver around it. Because, naturally you have a lot of people saying that salary cap doesn't exist. And even the Packers are readjusting it and finding more room. And how is that going to work with the Falcons?
Yeah, so the Falcons definitely aren't in the worst spot. I mean, you mentioned the Packers. We're not the Saints either. The Saints are like negative $70 million or something. They're ridiculous. But, I mean, Mickey Loomis is a freaking whiz at GM. I don't know how he does it every year, but he makes it happen. Terry Fontenot has his work cut out for him. Now, there are a lot of routes that they can go, and one of the easiest that seems to be the way that it's going is Calvin Ridley getting traded. And we're going to talk about Calvin Ridley in just a bit, but he's owed $11 million and it's fully guaranteed, but they would clear up $11 million because he's on his 5th-year option if they do, in fact, trade him. And I think it's almost a given at this point. Outside of that, there are some guys that I think their contracts can be adjusted or could be extended. Jake Matthews, who I think is one of our more underrated offensive linemen, one of the few good ones that we have. I think he has not taken a step back. I still think he's got some good years in front of him. He's about 30 years old, I believe. So I think if you can give him like a 2 or 3 year extension, then I think that would work. It'd save up a lot of money. And then Grady Jarrett, some people have been throwing him around as a trade target. While I do think they could get a lot for him, I hope they don't. I really love Grady Jarrett. I love what he is able to bring. He's in the middle of the prime of his career, and he's one of the only lone bright spots in our entire defense. So I think if you could extend him a 3-4 year deal, that'll save a ton of money. And those are kind of the easy ones. I think those are kind of the givens. And then, of course, there's some cuts you can make. Mike Davis, who they signed last year to a 2-year deal, you can save like $2.75 million. And I liked Mike Davis originally at signing, but he did not have the greatest year. And while I'm not like other Falcons fans who was absolutely bashing him, thinking he was completely awful, I don't think he was. But especially compared to Cordarelle Patterson, it's not even close. So I think he could get cut. Tyler Davidson, he's a defensive tackle for us. He barely got playing time. I think he's going to give in. That's saving about $2 million. Kendall Sheffield, again, barely played near the end of the season. That's another $2 million. So there's several routes that they can go to doing it. And then that kind of also leads to Matt Ryan. And there was Steve Weiss, who's been reporting about the Falcons the last year. He talked more recently and basically said that that's the Falcons' code red. That's the last thing they want to do, which I think is pretty eye-opening. I think they are done pushing money down the way with Matt Ryan. He's going to be turning 37 in May. And I think, as much as it pains me, Matt Ryan's time in Atlanta is probably nearing its end. That's just a realistic sense. And while you could trade him post June 1st and save about $20-25 million on the cap, I think next season in 2023 is when they really could get off him. And I think that's what they're planning on doing. I think they're planning this is probably going to be their last season, maybe 2023, but definitely after 2023, they move on from him, get off that crazy contract that he has. So I think they're going to try to not touch his contract and try to save monies outside of that so that they don't further burden them down the line with Matt Ryan.
Is this how they really got into that mess, with Matt Ryan, having the big contract, or how did they really get here?
That's part of it. I mean, I think originally speaking, when his original contract was, I think, 5 years for $125 million. And that's after his MVP season. And quite frankly, especially given the contracts that some quarterbacks are getting now, that's really not that bad. The issue became when you consistently start to restructure it and all that money gets pushed back. So currently his cap hits like $46 million, which is ridiculous. But a lot of people are saying like, oh, Matt Ryan's not worth that much. And it's like, okay, yes, he's not, but that's because it's a restructuring. He didn't sign a, Patrick Mahomes $50 million a year type of thing. That's not the contract that he signed. So I think the constant restructures and some bad contracts from the previous regime. I mean, when James Carpenter got like a $20 million contract, I thought that was ridiculous. There's a ton of dead cap going on right now. The Julio Jones contract from a couple years ago, while I love Julio Jones, one of my favorite players in the NFL, that contract was ridiculous, him coming off so many injuries. And then trading them, they got dead cap on him. Desmond Trufant's got dead cap. There's so much from the previous regime, and I think that's part of the reasons Thomas Dimitroff got fired in the first place. So currently, Terry Fontenot, he's trying to not remake those same mistakes. And while they did restructure him last season, it was one of those things, one of the only things they could do. They were kind of forced into it. Now they don't have to do it. I don't think they want to do it, so that for the future, they're not in that type of situation. I think that's one of the first things Terry Fontenot is learning as GM. I can't do the same thing that Thomas Dimitroff did. I've got to be better with the cap, make better contracts, and I think this is the start for that.
Knowing what you know about the Matt Ryan situation, what would you say about what's going on with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers?
I'm very fascinated for sure about what they're going to end up doing. And I was dead set after this, or before the season started. I thought he was gone. I thought there was no chance he was going to stay with the Packers. And even back to when Jordan Love got taken, it was puzzling. And I remember watching the draft, and I saw them move up, and I was like, okay, there's some receivers here, there's some linebackers, I can see what they're doing. And they chose Jordan Love, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then it started this entire drama going forward of Aaron Rodgers and the Packers and Brian Gutekunst and all this stuff. And then now all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it looks like he's probably going to stay. It's just crazy how that all came around in a circle. But I think with the Falcons now, I think it's a little bit different because with Aaron Rodgers, he's coming off back-to-back MVPs. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has shown no signs of slowing down. And I'll be honest, Matt Ryan is not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Tom Brady. He's not going to be playing until he's 45. I do think Matt Ryan is capable enough to where if he's got a decent O-line in front of him, he can make the throws still. He's not awful. I think he has the potential to still be a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. I think he's got the potential to still be a top 10 guy, but he's just not on their levels. And I think Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith understand that. I think they understand that financially it's going to be better for them now to take the next year or two with Matt Ryan, and then in either this draft or next draft, take the quarterback successor that you think could be the future. Let them sit behind Matt Ryan. But instead of, the current situation with Jordan Love, where Jordan Love was seen as a big time, like he's going to have to sit, which I guess kind of makes sense, but trading up for him didn't make sense at the time, I think. And if Matt Ryan ends up pulling in Aaron Rodgers and wins back-to-back MVPs, then that must mean the Falcons are doing well, so I can't be that mad. And that's one of those, if that happens, then okay, you got to figure it out at that point. I just don't think it's going to. I think the roster for the Falcons is a lot more terrible shape compared to the Packers. So I don't think they were going to be in that situation. I think it's better now to wait out the contract, get out of it when you can, and don't try to make this big extension. Don't make it worse than it already is with Matt Ryan.
Were you surprised about this year? Because, I had him on my Dynasty Fantasy League, and I was just like, okay, I was kind of waiting. It was a 2-quarterback league, right? So I was kind of waiting it out. I thought, I'll just throw him in. He's Matt Ryan. He's going to get some points or whatever. But it just didn't happen. I mean, were you surprised as a Falcons fan base?
A little bit. And I think part of it was Matt Ryan, but part of it wasn't. I think the big thing is when Calvin Ridley went away, I mean, that hurts him tremendously. And when you're looking at it in terms of the offense, it's like, okay, now your top option is a rookie in Kyle Pitts, who I love Kyle Pitts. I loved it when he drafted him. But when that's your top option and now teams like, okay, all we have to do is double team Kyle Pitts and that's it. And then your next best bet is, a 6-foot receiver who's not even on the team anymore. It's tough. And even for Matt Ryan, that's a difficult situation. I think he did the best that he could do. I think he showed I think he played better considering how the offensive line was than other quarterbacks would have been able to. He showed movement. He was able to make a lot of throws. So while statistically he didn't have the greatest season, I think it really could have been a lot worse. If you put other quarterbacks in the pocket, I don't think they do as well as Matt Ryan did. So I think if you can improve, even just improving the O-line, I think would be significant for Matt Ryan. And honestly, if you put Matt Ryan on a team like maybe Washington or the Broncos, I actually think he has a great season leads into the playoffs. I just think the current construction of the roster for the Falcons is not helping Matt Ryan. He's not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Tom Brady. He's not these super mobile quarterbacks, these superstar caliber quarterbacks that can, put a team on their back and win with them. It's just not him, but he's still a winnable quarterback. He can win you games. He's just not going to be able to, ride you to a playoffs with just him.
Yeah, and you talked about Calvin Ridley. What are you hearing from his situation? And as a Bears fan, I see them linked to him quite a bit as well. I mean, what are you hearing about him? Wanting to play, kind of getting back on the field in the situation.
So yeah, the Calvin Ridley situation it's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one, and the first thing I want to say is I hope he's okay.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people were kind of upset with his whole situation, and some people kind of forget that these players are people too. Yes, they're on a football team. Yes, they're seen as entertainment, but they're people too. We have no idea what they're going through, and it seems in the past couple years, mental health has really opened up in the NFL, and I think it's huge that they are opening up to fans and to teams and letting it know because again, they're people. So I hope he's getting the attention that he needs. I hope he is getting himself better, and I hope his well-being is better. In terms of football, it's going to be difficult because while I do think that Calvin Ridley is one of the better young receivers in the NFL, and I think we've shown how dynamic he can be, he has not been on the field in a while. And there's going to be a lot of questions on how is he not just mentally, but physically. But I've heard from Ian Rappaport that if they do, in fact, trade him, and it has been told that it is likely that he does trade him, there's a good chance the Falcons could get a lot. Even back when the season kind of got started and we were a few games into it before Calvin Ridley decided to step away. I mean, I remember talking on my podcast thinking like Calvin Ridley is just not the type of receiver that Arthur Smith really wants to use. He wants to use the AJ Brown type of guy. Calvin Ridley he's going to beat you with this route and he's going to kind of go deep on you. He's not going to be a rat guy, catch it in the middle of the field, take contact and that type of thing. That's just not him. Kyle Pitts is more in that type of mold. And I think this year, in this draft, there's a lot of guys, Drake London, Treylon Burks, that I think fit that type of role more. I think those are some reasons that those types of guys are being linked to the Falcons in terms of the combine right now. And so even back then, I thought Calvin really could be a trade candidate if they can't fit him into the scheme. So now it seems that it might be just a good shot for both teams to get a fresh start. In terms of places, I've heard everywhere from the Bears. Philadelphia seems like a spot he could potentially go. I've heard he would like to go to Miami as well. So I think all those places are places that they could have some additions to the offense that would help him be pretty beneficial. And I think for Terry Fontenot, it depends on the compensation that they can get back. I've seen some people say that, we'll give you like a third-round pick. And I just don't think that's enough for Calvin Ridley. I know that he's got the mental health issue, and it makes his situation a lot more questionable. But he's just too good to me. He's too young, too explosive. We've seen what he's been able to do. And I truly think that a team could be willing to give up a first-round pick for him. We saw this a few years ago, a guy like Amari Cooper, when he got traded from the Raiders to the Cowboys and immediately got an extension with the Cowboys, it seemed, just a season after. And Ian Rappaport even mentioned that whatever team trades for him, there's a good chance that they will have to give him an extension immediately to kind of show a commitment to him being able to play there. I think that could very well happen. I'm not entirely sure what that contract would be, how the guaranteed money would go, but I think the Falcons are going to have to get at least a second-round pick plus more. Given last offseason, they traded Julio Jones and got a second. I think you've got to at least be able to get another second, and I think you could potentially get a first. And to me, the team that I feel the most confident in possibly doing something like that is the Eagles. They have 3 first-round picks. So I think you could definitely see them potentially trading one of those for a guy like Calvin Ridley to pair with Devontae Smith. I think the Dolphins wanting to build around Tua, that could really, really work. And for your Bears, I mean, I think a guy like Justin Fields, considering that you're losing Allen Robinson probably in free agency.
Absolutely. Yep.
Being able to add Calvin Ridley to Darnell Mooney, I think would be great for the development of Justin Fields. So I think any of those teams would work. And at this point, I kind of go with the idea that Calvin Ridley is going to be gone, and I hope he succeeds wherever he ends up going. But I do think it's about time that both teams do kind of get a fresh start.
I have that same thought about Allen Robinson. I've liked him, ever since he signed with the Bears, and but he did kind of quit at the end of the year, and he didn't have a good connection with Fields. But I wish him the best, and he does need a fresh start as well. And when you think of these players, they are people, and they. When you're frustrated at a job and you're not a right fit, it's good to find a place that is a better fit.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of Allen Robinson, I think it was like about the trade deadline. And I'm still going with it. I say he ends up with the Patriots. I feel like that makes a
Mm.
ton of sense in terms of a possession type of guy that Bill Belichick would really like. And I think he fits that offense super, super well. So I like Allen Robinson going there. I haven't seen a bunch of buzz towards that, but that's been my projection for the entire season.
That would be about right with the Patriots, just kind of coming in under the radar and getting a player like that, especially to pair with Mac Jones. They
Hmm.
really haven't had the solid receivers that for a long time, ever since Randy Moss. I don't think.
Yeah, it's been a bit, and I think the what they tried to do last season, spending a bunch of money, I was kind of questionable on them spending it basically a lot of money on two tight ends. I thought that was a
Hmm.
little odd.
Hmm.
Hunter Henry made a lot of sense, but then they took the tight end from the Titans, and I was like, I don't know about two of them for that much money. But I think they're still going to be willing to spend. I think that defense is good enough for them to be able to make it back to the playoffs, but that offense has got to be better. They got to be something outside of just a rushing team, and I think Allen Robinson would make a lot of sense. Or even Calvin Ridley. I mean, a few years ago, Belichick was willing to spend a second round pick to take on Mohamed Sanu from us. So I gotta
Mm.
think if they're willing to give up a second for Mohamed Sanu, they could probably give up a first for Calvin Ridley. That's my hope at least.
When you look at the draft for the Falcons, do you see them targeting a wide receiver early, or what would be make most sense with the team?
I think that the roster is so devoid of talent. They could go
Hmm.
in so many different directions. And there's a lot of guys at the top of the draft that I think I've seen mocked to them that I think would fit very well. There's been talks about Kayvon Thibodeau and his effort and him potentially dropping. If he falls to 8 for the Falcons, they better run to the table because that would be our pass rush is awful. It was the worst last season. And I think pass rush rate, we were only above the Lions. So it was just terrible. I think Kayvon Thibodeau is a great step toward that. I think a guy like Kyle Hamilton, while we did take Richie Grant, a safety, in the second round last year, he's a guy that, I mean, he's got the speed of a safety, but the size of a linebacker. And he's such a big playmaker out of Notre Dame. I'd love him to be on the team. I mean, whether it's on offensive defense, the Falcons need playmakers right now, and he'd be one of them. They could decide to go offensive line. Obviously, there's a bunch of issues there. And while I do kind of feel like free agency is the route that I would want to go, get more proven talent, if a guy like Evan Neal, who I think goes number 1 overall, but maybe
Oh,
him or Akem Ekwonu or Charles Cross from Mississippi State, any of those offensive tackles end up falling, you could see the Falcons take them. In terms of receivers, I mean, Garrett Wilson's my number 1 guy. He could go there. Treylon Burks, I've seen mocked there. And then, of course, I think corner is also an option. Ahmad Gardner is currently my number 1. It was Derek Stingley, but given that he's not going to be at the combine, he's going to have another surgery. I'm just really questionable about that now. But I think Derek Stingley has the highest upside of any of the corners. So I think they could take him there. Any of those positions, I think would be great. And then, of course, there's the option of the Falcons trading down, which I'm also super big on. If there's not a big blue chip prospect, I think try to trade down, maybe with one of these teams like the Broncos or Washington, or maybe even the Steelers that are looking to get like a Malik Willis at quarterback. I think trade back, get some more picks. And because they just need so much talent, you could still get a Devin Lloyd, a McDuffie, Davis, any of these types of guys for the defensive side. Or if you want to get a receiver, I mean, London could still be there. Jameson Williams could be there. There's so much that the Falcons need. There's so few ways that I think I would be upset if they went. The only one would probably be quarterback. I'm not super big on them going quarterback in the first round at least. Because they have 2 second-round picks, I'd be okay with, Desmond Ridder in the second, maybe a Sam Howell, maybe a Charlie Strong. I like all those guys in the second round, and given they have multiple second-round picks, I feel a lot better about that. Just not in the first round, especially not at 8. I've seen like Malik Willis mock there. I think Malik Willis is okay. I think he's got some high upside. He's not my number 1 guy, though. That's Kenny Pickett. And even Kenny Pickett, at 8, the Falcons have too many holes. I don't think this is the draft to go with your first-round pick and take a quarterback. That's potentially 2023 when you got guys like Stroud or Young that are going to be in that draft. So if your guy's in the second, take him there. In the first round, I'll take basically any other position but quarterback.
and when you look at last year's draft, Kyle Pitts was the pick there. Were you surprised by that at the time? And then kind of looking at him, what is the ceiling for him?
At the time, to me, it was the way I was kind of seeing it is they were either going to take a quarterback, which was probably going to be Justin Fields, or they were going to take Kyle Pitts. It was basically between them two to me. My guess was Trey Lance was going to go 3, And that ended up being the case. There was a lot of smoke screen about Mac Jones going 3. I didn't believe it for a second. I was just like, there's no way. There's no way Mac Jones goes 3. They traded up to do so. I don't see it happening. So they took Trey Lance. I was like, okay, it's either Justin Fields or Kyle Pitts. And going into it and going into the night of, everything was they're taking Kyle Pitts at 4. And while a lot of people were like, I don't understand taking a tight end at 4, I, ever since the offseason, was adamant he is a wide receiver. He's not a tight end. Tight end is just a label. And he played this season like a wide receiver. A lot of people were worried about him staying in line, and I told everyone, no, they're not going to keep him in line. That's not how he works. At Florida, they moved him all around the place. They put him outside. They put him in the slot. They did do some in line and swirled him out a little bit. He's going to be moved around. That worked. That he had over 1,000 yards. The only issue I had with Kyle Pitts was that he only had 1 touchdown on the year, and it wasn't even on American soil. It was in London. Mm-hmm. So I hope that he can get better in the touchdown department. I think he is. He's way too talented at 6'6", 240. He's a giant body with like 4.4 speed. He's a freak athlete. And in terms of ceiling, I think he went into the year with exceedingly high expectations. I mean, there are people, they were calling him a unicorn, which was a great little joke and nickname and everything, but there were people saying like he can get a gold jacket now. Do I think that's a ceiling? Yeah, I do. I think he could be a Hall of Famer, depending on how he gets used. And given that he's already chasing records his rookie season, had over 1,000 yards, tons of receptions, showed explosiveness, showed one-hand catchability, he showed it all in his rookie season. And I think 2 to 3 years from now, he could be talked about as a top tight end in the league. I think he's that type of potential. And I think right now, especially considering Calvin Ridley's about to leave, at least with the remainder of his contract, he's going to be the number 1 guy. Now, he's going to have to learn how to be able to break out of that. I think he's going to have to refine his route running a little bit, because there were times where, yes, he was double teamed, but he was getting a double team to the point where he only had like 2 catches on the day. And I think one part of that is they're going to have to get another guy to kind of pair with him to force defenses to not be able to do that. But also he's going to have to learn how to be able to read defense a little bit better. And as a rookie, that's just going to happen. That happens with anybody. But if things go the way they can go, I think he's going to have a Tony Gonzalez type of effect in Atlanta at the tight end position. I think he has the potential to act as a Julio Jones when he was here. So I think he's got extremely high potential. I think the ceiling, the sky's the limit for him. I think he can be on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I think 1,000 yards every single season is not I don't think that's a very hot take. I think that's very possible for him. And honestly, if he can just get the touchdowns up, I think in the next 2 to 3 years, after Travis Kelce kind of, gets a bit older and probably steals off a little bit, I think the top spot for tight end is going to be between him, Mark Andrews, and George Kittle.
Yeah, and a lot of that might be on the coaching and how they kind of scheme to get him open, right? Like, what do you see as this coaching staff, their strengths in maybe doing that going down the line? So
when the coaching staff got hired initially, for the most part, I was very happy with it. Like I said, I like the Arthur Smith hire coming from Tennessee. I liked Dean Pease coming in. Dave Ragone, you know him from his time in Chicago, coming in. I was like, okay, I guess. That's fine. I was like, he's not calling plays. Arthur was like, no, I'm calling plays. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm okay with that then. And there was some good and some bad. I think Arthur Smith, again, he's able to show some of his vision, but I think you did see the fact that he was a first-year head coach. I think between time management, when to use timeouts, aggressiveness at the end of halves and at the end of quarters, I think he learned from that, and he had some growing pains. He definitely did, especially end-of-half situations, and when do I be aggressive here? When do I kick the field goal here? When do I go for 4th down? And I think we saw that from a lot of rookie coaches this season. I think Brandon Staley, in the final game of the Chargers season, going for it on 4th down from their own 20-yard line was ridiculous. I don't think Arthur Smith had it that bad, but I definitely think he learned some from there. Dean Pease coming out of retirement, it's tough because I'm like, okay, this is the second time he's coming out of retirement. How good is he still? I think he knows the stuff, and I think he even openly said that, look, there's a lot of my scheme that we're not even doing right now because they haven't been able to learn the playbook. So I think adding the talent needed for their scheme will make their defense so much better. So I think I'm okay with the coaching staff right now. I want to see them add more talent before I really start to say oh, this is bad or this is good. I saw some good, I saw some bad. I'm kind of mailing them right now, but they need to add some talent before I can really say oh yeah, this coaching staff is going to be able to take us far, because we've seen really good coaching staffs not have talent and look terrible. We've seen some coaching staffs that aren't that good, just have supreme talent, and they're fine. So the jury's still out for them for sure.
Well, in going into next season, this past season, they were close, so to speak, to the playoffs. It didn't happen. What are your expectations going into 2022? I mean, obviously it's not Super Bowl or bust. Where are you at as far as wins, losses, and expectations for the 2022 season?
So before the playoffs kind of ended, I was kind of thinking like, okay, this team is still so devoid of talent. They need a lot more talent to really be competitive. They were about a 500 team, but like looking at that and the season that they had, they basically beat bad teams such as the Giants, the Jets, and the Jags, and got blown out by good teams such as the Cowboys and the 49ers. So it was like they're like the best of the bad, but they're not competitive against the good ones. So that showed a talent issue to me, and I think they needed to add to that. So before the offseason kind of began and after the Super Bowl, I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about him, And then Tom Brady retired. And now it seems Falcons, fandoms are thinking that we are now, because Matt Ryan is basically the best quarterback in the NFC South, which is kind of crazy to say, but I think it's fairly true, that they are the kind of the candidate to be able to win it. I'm not that far because I think they're better than the Panthers. I think the Panthers are still a super, super young team with some coaching deficiencies, and they don't know what's going on with their quarterback situation. I mean, Sam Darnold, who knows? A lot of people hate Sam Darnold. I don't hate him that much but he's not a great quarterback by any means, but I think he could at least do some decent work, and their offensive line could arguably have been said that was worse than the Falcons last year. It was just atrocious. And Sam Darnold got sacked so much, he almost didn't have much of help. But still, that team needs a lot. And I even saw a report earlier today that said they'd be willing to bring back Cam Newton. So I don't know what they're doing at the quarterback position there. Makes no sense to me. And then you look at the Saints, and I would love to know what they're doing with Taysom Hill. I'd love to know. Not a clue.
I think Sean Payton was the only one that really knew.
Yeah. And now he's gone. So It's like I don't understand the money that they gave him. But to me, I don't think he's that good of a quarterback. I mean, he's a great at whatever you want to call him, the Swiss Army knife that he is, but he's just not a good pure quarterback. They had Jameis Winston, who I think is honestly better than Taysom Hills, but we'll see what they decide to do with that because he's a free agent now. And then their receiving room is not that great. Michael Thomas is coming back, but how good is he going to be coming off of injury, and how welcomed will he be to the team? Defensively, they've still got a lot of good pieces, but they're also like $50 million still over the cap. So they've still got to make a bunch of moves. They're going to have to cut some people. So I think that team is going to be a little less talented going into next season. And we don't know what the new coaching staff's going to look at without Sean Payton. So there's a lot of question marks there.
We still don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara either.
Exactly. Yeah, especially after his arrest. Yeah. And I haven't heard much since that happened. But I mean, based off reports, it doesn't look like he's going to come back anytime soon. So
yeah, he's got to miss some time.
Right. So and that's their best playmaker, at least the healthy wise. So that's going to be a gigantic loss for them. And then in terms of the Bucks, they still got a lot of talent for sure. But I mean, Ali Marpet, their guard, retired unexpectedly, and to me, that's a gigantic loss. I mean, he was like 28 in the prime of his career, playing Pro Bowl caliber guard, and he's gone now. Of course, you lose Tom Brady. And then offensively, Leonard Fournette's a free agent. Ronald Jones is a free agent. You still got Mike Evans, but Chris Godwin's a free agent. It looks like they may franchise tag him. I'd love to know what money they have to be able to make that happen, but we'll see. And then defensively, they got a lot of guys, but they're going to have to, I think, cut some people if they want to add in the people that they want. And then, of course, at quarterback, who is it? What do you do? And considering now the expected quarterback carousel that we thought we were going to have, Aaron Rodgers is probably going to stay. It looks like Russell Wilson's going to stay. So is Jimmy Garoppolo your best bet? And how good does Jimmy Garoppolo make the Buccaneers? That's a big question mark. So the Falcons, I think, have a chance. I mean, I think the division winner could honestly be like 9-8 next season.
This is what I was going to say. This is where I would put in the meme of, so you're telling me there's a chance.
Yes, exactly. I think the NFC South could be, there's been jokes that I've had with some of my friends calling the NFC East the NFC least. After especially like last year when Washington was like 7-9 and won the division. I think the NFC South could be like that next season, depending on what happens with the Buccaneers specifically. But yeah, there's a chance. Now, it's going to take some bargain binning on the free agency side, and it's going to take some a good draft to come in and contribute right away, I think the Falcons have a shot. I'm not saying it's likely, and I'm not going to say I have super high expectations for it, but it is a chance, and it'll be interesting to see.
So here's a question, and this is what I thought even going into last year for the Bears, right? Almost the worst thing is just to be mediocre, right? You either want to be really good or really bad, especially when it comes to needing that next quarterback. And the Bears, they kind of made everything, by going out just the way the draft fell and then getting that trade, Justin Fields getting that quarterback. I mean, they tried it with Trubisky, that major fail. As a Falcons fan, I know it's hard as a fan of a team to root for losses, right? But would it be better for them to maybe be terrible so they can get higher up in the draft when there's a good quarterback, or to be average? Because they're not going to be great, right? So if they're right around average, they make the playoffs and still are not, able to get that top tier quarterback. Does that just even set them back even further, or
it depends? Like, to me, what does the Falcons base want to achieve? Because I think one of the biggest issues this season especially was the Falcons could not sell tickets. If you ever saw their stadiums, it was empty. No one wanted to go to games. No one is interested in Atlanta right now. And considering you've got the city with the Atlanta Hawks, they just went off and were able to make it to the NBA Finals last season, and this season they're not that great, but they're coming off that high.
But they're not. I would say even the Hawks, they're not even well supported in Atlanta, are they?
Not much. But at least you could see, there's a spark. Something was there. Something that got them excited, and it seemed like a lot of people were excited about the Hawks. The Braves obviously just won the World Series. They're going off a big high. Now, granted, there's a lockout happening right now, so who knows what's happening with baseball. But you've at least got the other big – and then I don't watch soccer very much, but they've been pretty successful. They won a championship not too long ago.
Oh, right.
So you've got all the other teams doing well, and then you got the Falcons just sitting here in mediocrity doing nothing. No one's interested in them. So are they willing to push their chips in just enough to make it to the playoffs and maybe excite the fan base more? Maybe. And are they willing to think, okay, we're not that good right now. Do we want to just play the young guys and maybe get a decent pick next season, see if we can get a top 5 pick, get a CJ Stroud, get a Bryce Young next season, have our new franchise guy, move on from Matt Ryan, and then start a big-time rebuild? And what's tough is Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, while I think they're going to be a good duo, it is impossible to tell what they're trying to say sometimes. I'll listen in on their press conferences, and they're like, are we rebuilding? I'm not going to tell you. Are we competing? I'm not going to tell you. It's so difficult to say what they want to do. But I want to say, especially with Arthur Blank as the owner, they're not going to just tank. I think they're going to try to compete, which could force them into this state of mediocrity that it feels like they've been in for so long, until they can, actually be able to compete. Now, I'll also say this, just because you take a top 5 pick does not mean they're going to pan out. So I think that Terry Fontenot is going to have to find the good value in free agency, find the good values in the draft. So even if they are picking, in the middle teens, if you're getting good guys, then it's going to be, I think it's fine. I mean, we saw like a team like the Cowboys, they ended up going backwards in the draft. They end up with Micah Parsons, and he's the defensive rookie of the year. So, and then we've also had guys like Jeff Okudah not too long ago taken by the Lions, who was taken like number 3, and he's kind of been a bust at this point. Now, there's partially injuries, but all that to say is we've seen guys, TJ Watt, who sadly the Falcons didn't take him so long ago, and that breaks my heart. But he was taken, I think, like 29 or 30 by the Steelers, and he's one of the best defensive players in the country right now. So wherever they decide to pick, if they can get value, I think they'll be fine. So I'm not too worried about them staying in mediocrity, outside of the fact that it feels like they've been there forever now. So my only hope is, again, going forward, show me improvement. Don't take a giant step back unless that's what you're trying to do. If you're like, okay, we are going to tank in order just because we're going to play all the young guys, then fine. If you're going to try to compete, then at least get better every season, because next year, while there seem to be an open NFC South, their schedule's much harder next season than it was this season. So if you can win the division at 9-8, then I'll be super happy you made the playoffs. But you just got to show something going forward. You can't just sit in the middle without showing any improvement. That's my only request as the Falcons fan.
It's so interesting. You think of like NFL, especially owners, and kind of insulated. They're always going to kind of make money, and but it is interesting to hear from Falcons. They were having a hard time selling tickets. I mean, with the Bears, the ownership. I mean, it's been there forever since Hallis. I mean, it's a family thing, and they have continued to put a poor product, average product on the field. People still go to games because it's Chicago. When you look at Atlanta, all. All of the other options. I mean, Georgia's in Athens. I mean, they had a great season. I don't know, with Georgia Tech, close by. I don't know what the, support is there within Atlanta for Georgia and everything like that. So there's a lot of success there, and there's other things to do. So the Falcons, if it's not a good product, they're not gonna, people aren't gonna go to games.
Yeah, and if you saw, and I remember. I don't live in Atlanta, so it's tough for me to be able to go to games pretty frequently. But I would watch on TV and just look over, and it's just there's barely anybody there, and it's one of those things. It's tough for. I mean, you got the diehards that are there. There's diehards in every fan base, but if you don't have anything even seemingly interesting to show, then they're not going to want to see it. And I remember specifically the NFL opener against the Eagles. I think there was a good amount of people there. But they got blown out by Philadelphia, and it was since then it was like the air was taken out of the Falcons for the entire season. So I'm hoping that they can show some competitiveness, maybe get some. While you're not going to be able to splurge in free agency, get a name or two, and maybe get a Cordarelle Patterson, get some life back into the fan base, and then I think maybe that'll even jumpstart the team, because if they have a crowd playing behind them, that's going to affect them. So maybe that'll help improve it. But I think they've got to jumpstart their team to be able to jumpstart the fan base to actually get something going. And until that happens, I'm afraid I don't know how far they're going to be able to go. I don't know exactly what their ceiling is. But I'm just hoping sooner rather than later they start competing again.
Well, the Falcons did win something this past year, and I'm not sure if you had heard the 2021 NFL Fan of the Year was from the Falcons, and because I had a chance to interview some of the fans of the day or fans of the year, not him, but he got a big chain, evidently, like a gold chain. Yeah. I don't know if did you see that?
I saw his picture. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at the Falcons, they went to the Super Bowl. I mean, they have the whole meme. I mean, would it take winning the Super Bowl to kind of get over that? I mean, what will it take to kind of get over that?
That is a tough question. Because that Super Bowl, it's one of those things. I'll always remember where I was. I'll always remember what I was thinking. And I remember specifically when we got up 28-3, I was like, Tom Brady's on the sideline. Please do not set your foot off the gas. And that's exactly what they did. They set their foot off the gas. And I remember there was something on Twitter. I remember who it was, but it was like, if you can go back to one thing in the history of your franchise and change one play, what would it be? And almost every Falcons fan will tell you they'll go to that Super Bowl and change something. And to me, it was Tom Brady throws it in the middle of the field. Robert Alford looks like he's picked it, and he pounces it up, and then Julian Edelman makes this circus catch in a pile to somehow extend the drive. And I was like, I don't know what devil magic the Patriots have this year, but this is just awful. But it was a part of the Georgia curse that people have felt forever. I mean, the Braves winning, 14 straight division titles, only winning one Super Bowl, and then not being able to win a single playoff series until 2018 when they finally did, or 2019, whatever. No, it's been 2020. It's been a while. Yeah. And now you've got, Georgia Bulldogs, they won a championship. The Atlanta Braves just won a championship. Maybe it's over. In terms of what the Falcons can do, I think to get over that, they're going to have to win a Super Bowl. But it's just, I don't know when it's going to happen. And I mean, I love Matt Ryan, and I think he deserves a Super Bowl. I think he should have won that one. But it's just, do I think the Falcons can win a Super Bowl in the next 3 seasons? No, I don't think they're built to be able to do that. So I don't know when it's going to happen. I think the fact that the Braves were able to win a championship and, kind of reinvigorates at least Atlanta as a sports city was a positive thing. But in terms of the Falcons themselves, I think they've got a while till they can do that. And I think the first step is becoming that team that is consistently competitive. I mean, you've got a lot of teams that are consistently competitive that they haven't won a Super Bowl in a while, such as the Packers and the Steelers. I mean, I'll always credit Mike Tomlin with the fact that ever since he's been the coach, they've never been below 500, which is crazy to me. Like, as a Falcons fan, I'm like, And some people want Steelers fans were like wanting Mike Tomlin fired after this season. I'm like, how would you possibly want that? I would die to never be below 500.
Yeah, I would have loved him to be coach of the Bears.
Yeah, so yep. I think if they can just get to a spot where even if you're not winning a Super Bowl, you're at least, okay, every single season, we know we have a chance because we're making the playoffs. That to me has got to be the next step. Get to that point, and then I think it's going to really be able to help jumpstart them as a franchise.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, so you could follow me at JC3 Talks, and my podcast is JJ Talks. If you want to follow that, it's at JJ Talks Pod. I actually am just going through a bit of a rebrand at the moment, but we've got some interviews coming up there. So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. So follow us there and stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jonah. And once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Atlanta Falcons. And we'll catch you on the next episode then.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.